in conversation today with me is Louise Van Rhyn from Partners for Possibilities, which looks at strengthening society as a whole through the cultivation of relationships across cultural, racial, gender, and language boundaries. These conversations are necessary for the research of the role of women as social partners in South Africa during specific interventions. The outcome of this research will serve as a guideline for the social compact and for the incorporation of women into peace-building, humanitarian, and development processes. So thank you once again, Louise, for making this time. And just share for us a little bit about your background and how did you come to this point where you started or focusing now with Partners for Possibilities? I mean, it's a dynamic vision, and I think very much needed for South Africa where we are today. And consider what I've done with the other women whom I've spoken with. I realized that, women bring a different reality to dealing with our challenges. And the more voices that we get out of these different women, perhaps it is that we can bring about greater change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So in terms of how I got to this place, so I started Partners for Possibility 13 years ago. And it was at a time when I was feeling that I could not imagine continuing to focus on a for-profit existence when I felt that there's so much social change work that needed to be done, social justice. I just felt that there was a lot more that we could do. And I was looking for how do people like myself, who I don't have, education's not part of my background. I'm a organizational development, leadership development consultant. My curiosity was how can people like I make a contribution even though we're not trained as educators? And so that's why I wanted to tap into the gifts of the business community where I understand business. And I wanted to use my own unique talents and skills, which was leadership and organizational development. And long story short, that led to Partners for Possibility.
The Partners for Possibilities, I see one of your driving focuses is the cultivation of relationships across cultural, racial, gender, and language boundaries. But this can be pretty difficult to navigate because there's always nuances and hidden context when we speak about race and gender or culture and language, etc. So when you speak about these very dynamic concepts, is there a difficult way in which, they manifest, and then how do you envision bringing this all together? Because ultimately, if you can manage this and if you can cultivate relationships that meet along cultural, racial, gender, and language boundaries, you tend to eliminate a large amount of conflict.
Exactly. So we've been doing this for, as I said, 13 years. Over that time, about 6,000 people have personally benefited from being part of the program and had their lives changed. And they have impacted about more than 1 million people now. And so we really do feel that we have found the key. And it didn't come, automatically. There was a lot of work and a lot of practicing and a lot of mistakes and, many things that happened along the way. But where we are now is we can, with quite a significant sense of certainty, know that if we have 9 business leaders, 9 principals in a leadership circle, that at least 16 of those 18 people will have a life-changing experience. And that part of what will have happened through this program is that their hearts will have been opened by someone different to themselves. And they would have discovered the beauty of our diversity. And they would have been able to tap into the knowledge, skills, contribution that someone from a different race group, gender, ethnicity, cultural group, all of those, that there's a kind of appreciation for the value of the difference and the beauty of our diversity. So it does feel like one of the things I struggle with is it feels like huge responsibility to have discovered the key. So it's like when you have the key to the Holy Grail, you have to make sure that you make more of it, and that's been not without its challenges.
And so, okay, now you have to make more of it. But one of your one of the key driving factors behind Partners for Possibilities is reducing inequality in education. And you see what's happening right now on our campuses again. So, how would you then take your leadership skills, take this which you have developed, this key that you say is successful, and apply it to the youth, and manage the controversy or the conflict between the youth, the university, and the state?
Ooh, that's a big question. And I don't have the answer. So, the one thing I've discovered is, so when I first had this idea that I wanted to make a difference in education. So I'll talk you through that process, because I don't know whether there are any kind of keys in that. But so I wanted to make a difference in education. I wanted to find a way to bridge the inequality divide, because what was known then, and unfortunately, I think it's a different, the ratio is slightly differently. But when we started this work, it was known that between 10 and 20% of schools were very successful and delivered really good education outcomes. And between 80 and 90% of schools were not delivering good outcomes. And so my question was, what can we learn from the 20% to have an impact in the 80%? And we found there's a methodology called positive deviance. So we looked at what are the key enablers that are always present in the 20%, and could we work towards creating those enablers in the 80%? And we found that in schools, and that this is different from from universities. But in schools, there was always a really good principal who was confident and energized for their task in the 10%. And that was mostly absent in the 80% or in the 20%. The other thing is that the principals were very strongly supported by the community and by the parents in the community in the 20%. And in the 80%, that wasn't so. And thirdly, that the teachers were very motivated and energized and well trained. And that wasn't so in the 20%. So that in the 80%. So we were able to work to create a program that facilitate those three outcomes. So what would be interesting in the universities is there are universities where we're not seeing the same, the same uprising. And I don't know whether there's anything we can learn from those universities. So I'm not sure that that applies, but I do think there's an opportunity to engage differently with each other. And it feels like a lot of the behavior that we're seeing is when student feels that they're being treated in a hierarchical fashion rather than adults, because they're young adults who deserve to be invited in to be part of the solution. So I wonder whether there's a feeling by students, and I haven't engaged with these students, so this is all speculative, but whether if those students were really invited to be part of the solution rather than being treated as a problem, whether we'll see a different response.
And do you think if you bring it down to basic education now, you speak about creating a fair shot at becoming economically productive adults. Is that the only key to success, or in your program, you recognize that to overcome this inequality in education, you of course also need at the same time some understanding of how to bridge the differences and perhaps the very toxic environment that South Africa has become, where we're very quick at finger pointing at everyone and anything rather than to hold ourselves to account. That's the first thing. Where accountability and ethical behavior is completely missing en masse right across the various institutions. So to teach young people to recognize that, you know what, we need to bridge these various gaps, and that these are values that need to be addressed. This is the learning process, that there needs to be ethics, there needs to be legitimacy, there needs to be morality, there needs to be accountability, there needs to be trust. Do these things factor into your process when you're engaging with the different stakeholders? So whether it is the younger generation in education, adults in terms of building citizenship, young people in leadership positions, etc. How do all of these conversations unfold as you take your very bold step forward in creating these partners for possibilities?
Yeah, so again, I think in hindsight now, I'm so grateful for the initial kind of design thinking that went into this program. So we did quite a lot of kind of research to find out, what my background's not education. My background is leadership and organizational development. So I was kind of saying, what might be true in education, because I didn't know. So Harvard School of Education said that the best thing that we can do for the children in schools is to work with the adults in those schools. So our focus has been very much on the adults, because we wanted to leave the educators to do the work of education. We wanted to we just realized that it's about that creating that enabling environment. So the enabling environment in a school, there's a very clear kind of understanding around what does that enabling environment look like. Mm-hmm. It requires adults who are working together, who are supporting, a wider community of people who are supporting the educators, so that the educators can focus on what happens in the classroom. So that the system needs to be functioning. The school, that whole school system needs to function. And what we find is that in 90% of the cases, that was not the case, that the school was not functioning effectively. So I've kind of lost track of where you were with the question, but it's just that my understanding is that we need to work with the adults, and we need to make sure that those adults firstly model the kind of leadership that we want to see more of. And one of those shifts is to move from a story about leadership that says leaders have to know the way and show the way and give direction, which is the old, outdated story about leadership, to the job of the leader is to create an environment where every person can make their best contribution, and where everybody's invited to bring their contribution to bear. So we've been very strongly influenced by the idea of asset-based community development. So again, if you think of any environment, whether it's schools or universities or businesses, it's for leaders to have a very clear narrative around leadership. And it's a different narrative to the one that I grew up with. Mm. And so what is the job of leadership? And then in that job of leadership, it's invitational, because you can't make people do things. You can invite people, you can ask them, you can engage with them, you can have robust conversations, but you can't force people to do anything, because I think that's also a very outdated idea of, management.
So you've been in this particular program at a time when South Africa has witnessed quite a few crisis moments. We've had COVID, we've had the UKZ and floods, we've had the unrest in the UKZ as well. Then in the Cape, we've had the issue of water and droughts and almost going to ground zero. Tell me, when you look at your role, in this very diverse landscape, do you have an interventionist approach? And is there an interventionist approach in times of crisis or conflict? And is this particular approach impacted by particular ideals that are implicit to your cultural background? So you started off by saying that, you wanted to do something, and you wanted to do something concrete. But, more than that, is there something that drives you? Is there spirituality and understanding of your humaneness, of your essence as a woman, that says, what, I need to make a difference. It's not enough just to be a mother and to empathetic and to recognize the roles that we play in our family, but that our broader society is our family too. And we need to go out here and we need to do something. So the first is about your interventionist role. And then the second is about, cultural values or particular feelings, essences, thoughts, behavior patterns, even maybe a crisis moment in your own life that has driven this.
Okay, well, that's very, very useful question. So interventionist approach. I have always been driven by a need to make a contribution beyond just my kind of comfortable suburban life. and I was always looking for that how question really, and then we went and lived in the UK, and I don't know whether you've ever lived in the UK, but when you live in England, it's a very comfortable, cushy life. And I lost that drive. I remember when I wrote my doctorate, one of the things I wrote in my doctorate is that I really wanted to make a contribution. And the people around me were laughing at me. They're going, what's that about? And that came from just after I left South Africa. So then when we came back to South Africa, it was like I couldn't imagine living in this country as a mother who brought my children back and not be part of the solution at scale. There was no way I was only ever going to be a consultant working with one or two organizations. I felt it just a burning need. I sometimes struggle to kind of make sense of it, but I think it's part of when you feel that you have, because you're so privileged. So I'm speaking from a place of enormous privilege. From that place of privilege, and having done, I've had the opportunity to study for 4 degrees. My last degree was around leading large-scale complex social change. And there are only a few people in the world that's ever had that opportunity. So I really did feel like I have been given so much that I could not, what's the word I'm looking for? I couldn't not make a bigger contribution. So that was a driving force at the time when I started Partners for Possibility. I'm asking myself many questions now about what is the next phase? How do people like me contribute now? Because obviously I'm definitely feeling the impact of the color of my skin, and realizing that in the world where we live in today, people in leadership positions need to have a different skin color. And so my role had to change because of that. And it's been tough for me to make sense of that, but that's another story for another day.
But that's a very difficult reality, both for me to hear it from you, and you're saying that, and I'm sure for you to live it, because ultimately, if there is going to be social cohesion in South Africa, a factor like that should not be developing. We should be working towards a more reconciliatory and perhaps a means of achieving an understanding of who we are and the role that we can play. Yes, you coming from a position of privilege means that you carry certain burdens, that you carry maybe a responsibility which might or might not have been yours to carry in the first place, but simply for the fact that you're a white woman in a country which has a traumatic history of apartheid, you are going to be labeled as responsible. So people are going to hold you to account for that despite your best contributions. But if South Africa is going to go forward, there is a certain reality, and that reality is that the mistakes of the past, committed by the past, are manifesting in different ways by people of the present. And if we look at the way in which the state is being run, state capture, cadre deployment, etc., the government of the day is not adequately representing its population. So the past was done based on race. The present is being done based on greed. And so the burden of the masses continues through different ideologies and different trajectories. If you are at that point, and you one of your ideals in Partners for Possibilities was to cross this racial divide, to cross the cultural divide, to cross the language divide. If you as a leader feel stuck, or perhaps have come to a point where you feel you need to renegotiate this for yourselves, what possibility is there then for people who don't know, that these are the challenges, or still have to be taught how to brace them?
So we have to find ways to I've had the beautiful privilege to listen to the Mandela tapes, with the interviews that Richard Steiner did with or Richard Stengel did with President Mandela. And that ideal of a non-racial society is an ideal that I'm certainly willing to give my life to. The opportunity for us to be invited in this country to all make a contribution and give what we have to give is the future that I'm committed to. But it's easier said than done.
Yes, it certainly is. Because as a woman now in a very largely male-dominated environment, do you find that there is still space for you to articulate yourself, or you still, largely being governed by by who you are, the color of your skin, the state of your privilege, and also maybe because of the changing circumstances where people want to make sure that they put the right package forward. It doesn't matter that it's not perhaps the best package, but it's just simply about ticking the boxes. As I spoke earlier with Busi, she said that there's a large problem with transformation in that people are still focused on ticking the boxes, and just that strong woman, when they enter a position of power, or they enter a particular space, it's no longer about your gender or your color, but it's about you as a leader, a human being, independent of those identities that frame you, and that you need to come in there and say what needs to be said and do what needs to be done. Because ultimately, if you don't, we're going to be continuing and looking at the same movie for the next 30 years. As my brother often says, we've been looking at this movie unfolding, this movie called South Africa, for the last 30 years. And it's just mind-boggling that we've reached this state.
Yeah, so I feel I have, again, I don't know whether that's because of how I grew up. I never felt restricted because I'm a woman. And I didn't even feel restricted in any way by my age over the years. But where I am in South Africa today, I feel having a white skin is a big
taboo.
It is to many Black people that I've been engaging with, and then many white people who feel that they want to do the right thing in the eyes of Black people. And the right thing, the story about the right thing, is we need to remove people with white skins out of positions of leadership and prominence. And I think we're missing out. We're missing out on the contribution of many people who have so much to give and who want to give and who want to be a contribution, who feel unable to because of the color of their skin.
So now a difficult question for you, Louise, that if you feel that way and you feel that they are missing out and there are people who want to give, and certainly I do believe that our focus should go to expertise, to capabilities, to potential, rather than to a race-based positionality, or an employment based on your race, because we've seen what BE has done to this country, and we've seen what it's done to Eskom, basically, and to many of the other state-owned enterprises. The difficult question here is that you see it, you felt it, you've experienced it, but you're withdrawing now. You feel almost there's a sense of withdrawal. I sense, are you fighting back, or are you going to find a new way?
Yeah, I have for a long time. I fought being ousted from the organization. That was my life's purpose, was my reason for being on the planet. And I went through, it was a very traumatic experience. So now I'm committed to contribute in places where the power structures look different. So because it was a not-for-profit, the not-for-profit was governed by a board who had the right to push me out. So what I'm doing now is I'm working in a for-profit where I don't give that power away. And I'm still making a massive contribution, but I'm not allowing myself to be in power structures where people can wield that kind of power over me.
So is that important for women in terms of leadership positions, and also in terms of your contribution towards alleviating conflict? Because right now you are in a conflict situation and you have to negotiate your way out of that in order to alleviate other forms of conflict.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the governance structure in our country can lead to abuse. So my experience was very abusive, felt very abusive then and still does. And I just personally will never put myself in that situation again. And I think if you look at many of the, and I don't want to, get involved in the, but there's many situations nowadays where because I've been through that, I can see that a woman is being ousted or pushed out of a role, white and black women, and it has that same feeling of abuse of power to it. So I'm much more aware of the kind of abuse of power that's happening in around women in leadership roles.
So, when you look at this now, the role of women, what women should be aware of, the kind of qualities that they need to manifest, and the understanding that they have, you work with other social partners, right? Because that's how you will execute this plan of yours to build a better South Africa, to touch the humanity of all. Do you believe then that social partners such as business, NGOs, and civil society groups should also play an active role in holding the state accountable, but also holding themselves internally accountable, so that when change comes, it happens all around? It's holistic, it's from the bottom up and top down.
So we definitely should hold the state accountable. They have they are supposedly in service of us as these key stakeholders. We all have a role to play to co-create this future that we have in mind. My position on that is that the only possible way, I think that's where I agree with your brother, the only possible way that we will create this future is if we all roll up our sleeves, every single one of us, and we all commit to doing what we can to create a better future. I almost left the country after this last experience because why would I stay in a country where I'm clearly not, where I felt very unwanted because of the color of my skin? I kind of got over myself in that, but I just realized the cost of that, this kind of racial, our commitment to get rid of white people, which is what it felt like for me in that situation. So we're going to have to overcome that. We're going to have to raise awareness when that happens and stop the ostracizing of white people who have a contribution to make. So I haven't found a solution to that yet. In a way, it feels like the corrupt government may open up some opportunities, because now we kind of might say, but actually, or maybe Eskom's failure, we might recognize that white people still have a role to play. But I think I'm acutely aware of the challenge, and I haven't got a solution yet. But I'm definitely continuing to think about it, having just been through that experience.
Having been through that experience, and of course other experiences, which is COVID, the UKZN riots, the floods, the drought in the Cape, can you share any of your experiences, during any of these different crisis moments, or maybe other crisis moments that you have experienced, and just reflect on them and tell us intrinsically, like, what were the lessons learned during these crisis moments, and how do you relate that in terms of your own womanhood, your own humanity, and your own humanness?
So we got through COVID, for example. Our whole organization got through COVID in a relatively unscathed. Obviously there were people around us who died, but the organization flourished and did well. And the reason for that is because we had invested in our relationships. And for me, that is the story about, women. It's a story about leadership, is that commitment to invest in the relationship, that beautiful African proverb that says, if you want to go far, go alone. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So our sense of community, our sense of Ubuntu in practice every single day enabled us to deal with some very difficult challenges, but it also enabled all of the people in our community to deal with difficult challenges. So leaders who have taken that seriously in their school communities, when COVID came, they could draw on the relationships that they had invested in. People who didn't invest in those relationships were not able to deal with the difficulties and the challenges. So if I had to summarize my leadership philosophy, it is about investing in relationships, investing in community, because together we can deal with any storm. But it requires us to first find each other. So this idea of finding each other in community, creating a space where every person can make their contribution, bring their gifts and contributions to, and then when the storm comes, that community, that human community has a much better chance of overcoming or dealing with any storm than any other, anything else we can put in place.
So that is a very high note to leave it on, but I would like you to leave me, and all those who will come back and listen to what you have to say, with a parting advice in terms of how do you, as a white African woman, and people might say this, this is contradictory, but I don't believe it is, because if you take the BCO's understanding of African, then you will understand that if you identify with the country and invested in it and want to build a better society, then certainly you are African. How do you, as a white African woman, determine your role in contributing to social justice, social cohesion, and nation building in a country that right now almost makes you feel alienated?
So I want to just acknowledge that being called an African woman does something in a very deep level, because that is my only identity. I don't have another identity. I'm African. And as an African woman who are absolutely committed to co-creating a better future for our children and their children, we have to learn to work together despite all of our, or making the most of our differences. We have to find each other's brilliance and each other's gifts, despite the context that we find ourselves in. Because I have seen time and time again that when people are committed to discover each other, magic happens. I mean, there's no way how you can kind of make sense of it rationally, but that commitment to open hearts, coming together and being committed to a vision that they can all mobilize behind. I always love listening to your brother, because he has a way of kind of really mobilizing people around this idea that it's every one of us. What the future need is for every one of us to make a contribution. And that's what I do every day, is I invite people to contribute what they have to offer, their gifts and contribution and uniqueness and femininity and, motherhood and all of those, because that's what makes them so special and enables them to make a contribution, especially in education, where every one of us can make a massive contribution. So that's my invitation, is just a continuous invitation for people to gift what they have and what they've developed over the years in service of a better future.
Thank you very much for that, Louise. It was powerful. And I think you remind me of something, and that is about tapping into the power of that which is most beautiful inside of us, to bring out the full realization of what each of us ultimately wants. And that is a good life for us and for everybody. If everybody has a good life, then it's automatic that you will have a good life. But if there's constant conflict in society, nobody is going to have the good life, And then people don't realize that. I think it's too much of a short-term vision that we struggle with. But your thoughts have been powerful and dynamic. I wish you all of the best. And we look forward to much more of the things that you are doing. And hopefully, one day soon, I'll have the wonderful privilege of being in one of your programs as well and benefiting from this. Thank you, Louise.